Today I wanted to talk about something that has revolutionized my workflow and the ability to process images recently for me. And the reason it's so important for me, particularly in my photography, is because, as you know, I'm a bird photographer and a wildlife photographer, and often I have to work with extreme telephoto lenses with teleconverters attached, crop body cameras, shooting wild birds, wild animals in poor light conditions, sometimes overcast as well. And as well as that, because these animals are so far away from me, I have to crop quite tightly into the images too. So what that means is I have a very poor starting place for the image. It's not like I've taken the shot of a portrait of someone beautifully lit in a studio with a full frame camera. I can't do that. Wildlife photographers, bird photographers, you'll know this. We can't do that. So how do we get around that? Well, I've discovered a piece of software that I've integrated into my workflow that is a game changer. It has changed everything for me recently, and it's called Topaz Denoise AI. It uses machine learning to help remove the noise and sharpen up images that you've had to take in these kind of situations. And I'm going to show you how you can integrate it into your Lightroom workflow now. So here we have a red-billed teal photographed in South Africa at dawn, actually before sunrise, at ISO 2000 with a 400mm lens at f2.8 with a Canon 7D Mark II, a slightly older and less noise responsive crop-bodied camera. And normally I wouldn't really be able to do too much with this shot, because if I drill into it, you can see there's noise all over the place. And not nice looking noise either. But before I take it into Topaz Denoise to correct this image, I need to draw your attention to a few things. The first is we're going to be converting this from a DNG to a TIFF file in that process. It's automated, you don't have to worry about any of that. But what you do is when you do that, you lose a few of the settings that you can apply in Lightroom. So you should apply those settings first. And they're these. First off, you're going to lose camera matching profiles. And these are really important, particularly to Canon cameras, and they may well be to those of you who use other brands. So I want to set this to standard in my case. I can also just use an Adobe standard as well. They're fairly interchangeable. So I've set the camera profile up because I won't be able to do that after I take it into a TIFF file. Any of the profiles that you've bought in preset packs, etc., will all still work, but not the camera ones. Then secondly, the scaling for the white balance. Currently it's in Kelvin. That's going to change to a straight plus and minus. It's not a train smash. It's not a big problem. You'll still be able to adjust it afterwards, but if you're used to seeing a Kelvin balance there, or you need to think in Kelvin, just bear in mind that when you convert to a TIFF, that's going to change to a different scaling. And then under lens corrections, we need to apply any of those that you wish to apply, because Adobe won't be able to pick up the defaults from the TIFF file, so put them in now before you take it into Topaz Denoise AI. And then last of all, just check in your detail panel for any sharpening and luminance. You don't want to apply Lightroom sharpening and luminance, and quite often that comes in on the import from preset into Lightroom. So we are done with the Lightroom settings. The final thing that I like to do personally is just to tightly crop around my subject, really tightly, to just get a good idea of exposure. I find that Lightroom does a better job of correcting exposure when it's tightly cropped. I'm going to come up to a custom workflow that I've built myself over on the left. It's part of something called a Wildlife Toolkit. If you're interested in that, you can check out the link down below. And I'm just going to go into the image preparation section and click Set Exposure and Flatten Color. And that's going to just set the exposure for this bird. I'm going to uncrop or resume the original crop that I had now, and you can see it's much brighter and it's a much more pleasant looking image. It's ready to take into Topaz Denoise AI. To do that, I come up to the photo menu on the top left, I click it, and I look for Edit In, and I'm looking for Topaz Denoise, which I've previously set up as a plugin on Lightroom. And in here is a little box that comes up. It says Edit a Copy with Lightroom Adjustments. That's perfect. It's going to take it into Topaz Denoise as a TIFF file, and we should see that open shortly on screen. Here we go. It's open. I'm going to move the preview box around the head of the bird and let's see what the standard settings do to it. Well, they've done a fantastic job, and quite often you don't need to go past this. But what I like to do is just check auto detect settings. Now, I find with auto detect that Topaz takes it too far. I think it's probably geared more towards portrait photographers who want to soften skin, etc., etc. Wildlifers, we don't really want to do that. We have feathers and fur, and we've got lots of detail in it that we need to bring out. So removing too much noise is just as bad as removing not enough noise. And this, under auto, typically tends to remove just a little bit too much for my taste. So all the noise is gone in this image, and it looks a little bit plasticky. In order to drag that back, what I like to do is set up, click on auto detect, let it do its thing, its magic, and then drag back the sharpening. I find it tends to over sharpen, and you just drag it back to a point where it looks good to your eye, and then drag back the reduced noise, and that typically sits around 5 or 10 points underneath sharpening for my images. I think that's done a pretty nice job. I'm going to just zoom over to a problem area on this bird, which is under the tail and in the darker areas of the background. It's done a fantastic job. Really, really nice job. And you can see they were pretty much near the standard settings to start with. Now you can play around with these settings and find a place where it's good for you. But I'm going to take this back into Lightroom, and I'm going to do that by clicking Save Image, and then I'm going to look at a before and after of these two shots. Well, I've got the image back in Lightroom now, so let's compare them. And what have I got? I've got the original on the right and the Topaz Denoise version on the left, and it is a quantum difference. It's really done a great job of masking around the bird and applying that sharpening as well. Let's look at this problem area at the back. It's done a really, really nice job. Fantastic. So the last thing that I like to do, and just because I am a wildlife photographer, and I talked about that plasticky sort of effect, we often have extreme separation between subject and background. We have a very flat background, and if you just paste a bird on top of that background, it looks like it's disjointed. It doesn't really work, and you get a sort of cut out feel to the shot. So you actually need to bring some of that noise or structure back into the image. And you can either do that in Photoshop by adding noise, or you can actually just do it in Lightroom. I have a set of presets in my workflow on the left here, and you can just bring that grain back into the image to tie the foreground and the background together. So I've done that, and what it's done, and you probably can't see this on the video, but it's just made that edge a little bit more structurally succinct to my eye. It really helps with this process. So that's the final touches. Now, if you'd like to know how to actually use it in Photoshop and how to actually add it as a plugin, those videos are coming next.